The punch that made headlines around the world was thrown at 1:47 a.m. on June 8, 1966. Frank Sinatra, 50 years old and one of the most famous entertainers on the planet, was sitting in the Copa nightclub in New York City when a dispute with the establishment's management escalated into a physical confrontation that would land him in jail and dominate newspaper headlines for weeks. The fight lasted less than 3 minutes, but it would become one of the most documented examples of Frank Sinatra's legendary temper and his willingness to use his fists when he felt disrespected or threatened. What started as a routine evening out would end with mugshots, court appearances, and a media firestorm that reminded the world that beneath Frank's sophisticated image lived a man who had grown up fighting on the streets of Hoboken and never forgot how to defend himself. If you love discovering the untold stories behind music history's most incredible moments, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. June 7, 1966. New York City. The setup. Frank Sinatra arrived at the Copa nightclub on East 60th Street around 11 p.m., accompanied by his usual entourage of friends, bodyguards, and business associates. The Copa was one of New York's premier nightclubs, a place where celebrities, politicians, and wealthy socialites gathered to see and be seen. Frank was in New York for business meetings and had decided to unwind at the Copa, which had a reputation for excellent service and discretion when it came to high-profile clientele. He requested his usual table in the VIP section, ordered his preferred drink, Jack Daniels on the rocks, and settled in for what should have been a relaxing evening. But Frank's mood was already tense. He'd been dealing with ongoing legal issues related to his business dealings, pressure from various law enforcement agencies investigating his alleged associations, and personal stress from his tumultuous relationship with actress Mia Farrow. Frank's temper, never far from the surface under the best of circumstances, was particularly volatile that night. Those who knew him well recognized the warning signs: the tight jaw, the narrowed eyes, the way he drummed his fingers impatiently on the table. Frank was wound pretty tight that night, recalled a friend who was present. You could tell he was looking for trouble, or at least ready for it if it found him. Midnight 1:30 a.m. The tension builds. The first sign of trouble came around midnight when Frank's party ordered another round of drinks. The service, which had been prompt earlier in the evening, suddenly became slow and inattentive. Frank's glass sat empty for nearly 20 minutes while waiters seemed to avoid their table. Frank summoned a waiter and demanded to know why the service had deteriorated. The waiter claimed they were experiencing problems in the kitchen and bar area, but Frank sensed something else was happening. "This is unacceptable," Frank told his companions. "We're not getting the service we're paying for, and I want to know why." Frank's business manager tried to calm him down, suggesting they simply finish their current drinks and leave for another establishment. But Frank's pride was wounded, and he was determined to get an explanation for what he perceived as deliberate disrespect. The situation escalated when Frank noticed other patrons, people who had arrived after his party, receiving prompt service while his table continued to be ignored. To Frank, this wasn't just poor service, it was a calculated insult. 1:30 a.m. The confrontation begins. Frank decided to handle the situation directly. He walked to the bar area and confronted Carl Cohen, the Copa's general manager, demanding an explanation for the poor service his party had received. "Mr. Cohen, I want to know what's going on here. My party has been sitting for over an hour with empty glasses, while you're taking care of everyone else." Cohen's response was dismissive. "Mr. Sinatra, if you don't like the service, you're free to leave." Frank was stunned by Cohen's attitude. He was accustomed to being treated with respect and deference wherever he went, and Cohen's casual dismissal felt like a personal attack. "Do you know who you're talking to?" Frank demanded. "I know exactly who you are," Cohen replied. "And I'm telling you that if you don't like how we run our establishment, you can take your business elsewhere." The exchange attracted the attention of other patrons and staff members. Frank realized that this conversation was becoming a public spectacle, which only increased his anger and humiliation. "Nobody talks to Frank Sinatra that way," Frank said, his voice rising dangerously. "In my club, I talk to people however I want," Cohen shot back. 1:45, the breaking point. What happened next would be debated in court documents, police reports, and newspaper accounts for months. According to witnesses, Frank and Cohen continued arguing, with their voices getting louder and their positions more entrenched. Frank demanded an apology for the poor service and Cohen's disrespectful attitude. Cohen refused, telling Frank that he could either accept the service as provided or leave the premises immediately. The argument reached its climax when Cohen allegedly made a comment about Frank's rumored business associations that Frank considered deeply insulting and potentially dangerous to his reputation. "You want to act like a tough guy," Cohen said. "Maybe you should take your friends and your reputation and get out of my club." Frank's response was immediate and physical. Without warning, he threw a punch that connected with Cohen's jaw, sending the club manager stumbling backward into the bar. The punch triggered a brief but intense fight involving Frank, Cohen, and several other men who either tried to break up the confrontation or joined it on one side or the other. 1:47 a.m. The fight. The brawl that erupted the Copa's bar area lasted approximately 3 minutes, but felt much longer to everyone involved. Frank, despite being 50 years old, fought with the intensity and skill of someone who had learned to use his fists on the streets of Hoboken. Cohen recovered from the initial punch and fought back, landing several blows before other club employees joined the fracas. Frank's bodyguards attempted to protect him while also trying to de-escalate the situation. Tables and chairs were overturned, glasses were broken, and other patrons scrambled to get out of the way as the fight spread across the bar area. The sound of breaking glass and shouting brought additional club security personnel running to the scene. Frank landed several more punches before the sheer number of people involved overwhelmed him. By the time someone called for order, Frank's shirt was torn, his face was bruised, and his carefully groomed hair was disheveled. But Frank wasn't finished. As club security attempted to restore order, Frank continued shouting at Cohen, promising further consequences for the perceived disrespect. 2:15 a.m. The arrest. The New York Police Department arrived at the Copa within minutes of receiving reports about the disturbance. When officers entered the club, they found a scene of chaos: overturned furniture, broken glass, and several men with visible injuries. Frank initially tried to use his celebrity status and political connections to avoid arrest, telling the officers that the incident was a simple misunderstanding that could be resolved without involving the legal system. But Carl Cohen was pressing charges, and witnesses confirmed that Frank had thrown the first punch. Despite his fame and influence, Frank was handcuffed and placed under arrest for assault. The sight of Frank Sinatra in handcuffs being led out of the Copa made for dramatic newspaper photographs that would appear on front pages around the world. Frank's humiliation was complete and very public. At the police station, Frank was booked, fingerprinted, and photographed for mugshots that captured him looking disheveled, angry, and far from the sophisticated entertainer his public image suggested. Frank's lawyer arrived within hours and posted bail, but the damage to Frank's reputation had already been done. The story was picked up by every major newspaper and would dominate entertainment coverage for weeks. June of 8th December 1966. The legal aftermath. Frank's arrest for assault generated more negative publicity than almost any other incident in his career. The mugshots became iconic images that reinforced public perception of Frank as someone with dangerous temperament and possible criminal associations. The legal proceedings dragged on for months, with Frank's attorneys arguing that he had acted in self-defense after being provoked and threatened by Cohen. Cohen's legal team painted Frank as an entitled celebrity who believed he was above the law and could assault people with impunity. Frank was eventually convicted of simple assault and fined $500, a relatively minor legal consequence that did little to repair the damage to his public image. The incident also affected Frank's business relationships. Several venues canceled upcoming performances, citing concerns about potential violence or negative publicity. Some film studios reconsidered casting Frank in family-friendly projects. Most importantly, the Copa incident reinforced law enforcement's suspicions about Frank's character and associations. FBI files from the period show increased surveillance and investigation following the nightclub fight. 1967-1998. The long-term impact. The Copa nightclub brawl became part of Frank Sinatra's permanent public record, referenced in every biography, documentary, and news story about his life and career. The incident was frequently cited as evidence of Frank's volatile temperament and willingness to resort to violence when challenged. Frank himself rarely spoke about the incident publicly, but close friends said he regretted letting his temper override his judgment in such a public setting. Frank knew he'd made a mistake, said longtime friend Jilly Rizzo, not in defending himself, but in allowing the situation to escalate to the point where it became a public spectacle. Frank valued his reputation and hated that this incident defined him for some people. The incident also affected Frank's relationships within the entertainment industry. Some performers and venues became more cautious about associating with him, concerned about potential violence or negative publicity. However, the Copa incident also reinforced Frank's reputation among certain audiences as someone who wouldn't back down from a fight, regardless of the consequences. This image of toughness and authenticity appealed to fans who admired Frank's refusal to compromise his principles. The legacy. The Copa nightclub brawl remains one of the most famous examples of celebrity violence in entertainment history. It demonstrated that Frank Sinatra's public image as a sophisticated entertainer masked a man who was still willing and able to defend himself physically when he felt threatened or disrespected. The incident also highlighted the complex relationship between celebrity status and legal consequences. While Frank's fame eventually helped him avoid serious legal punishment, it couldn't protect him from the negative publicity and professional damage that resulted from his actions. The fight showed Frank at his most authentic, not the polished performer, but the street fighter from Hoboken, who had never learned to walk away from a confrontation. Whether this authenticity was admirable or troubling depended largely on one's perspective about Frank's character and values. The Copa incident became a cautionary tale about the dangers of celebrity entitlement and the importance of controlling one's temper, regardless of provocation. It also demonstrated how quickly a reputation built over decades could be damaged by a few minutes of poor judgment. For Frank Sinatra, the Copa nightclub brawl was a reminder that his street fighting instincts, which had served him well during his rise to fame, could become liabilities as he aged and his public profile grew more complex. The incident remains relevant today as an example of how public figures must balance their private impulses with their public responsibilities, and how quickly fame can become notoriety when celebrities forget that their actions have consequences beyond their immediate circumstances. Today, the Copa nightclub where Frank threw those famous punches is long gone, replaced by modern buildings that show no trace of the legendary establishment where one of entertainment's most famous fights took place. But Frank Sinatra's mugshot from that night remains an iconic image that captures both his toughness and his vulnerability, a reminder that even legends are human, and that human beings sometimes make choices they later regret. If this story moved you, subscribe and hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to know that reputation is built over years, but can be damaged in minutes, and that controlling our temper is often the difference between respect and regret. Have you ever let anger override your better judgment in a public setting? Let us know in the comments how you've learned to manage your temper when you feel disrespected or provoked.